a meaning crisis is something I've experienced personally, and maybe others watching this can relate if they've had a similar experience. But one example is if you like lose your faith. I grew up in a very like conservative evangelical Christian house, and that was my meaning. That was my frame of making sense of the world, was through that story and those symbols and that general framework. And when I then went on to study that and started digging into, the history, the archaeology, kind of critically probing this story that I was using to make meaning of the world, I hit a wall. I had my own crisis, a crisis of faith. And the consequences of that were a feeling of just utter disorientation, a sense of vertigo. It's like you don't really know which way is up, which way is down, because your whole frame for contextualizing your experience and your reality has now disappeared, and you're kind of just falling. And those markers or milestones to make sense of things no longer there. So like if a question comes up, is this good? Is this bad? Well, you can't really go to the Bible anymore and just sort of like find some easy verse that will then give you the answer. You're kind of uncertain. And there's a whole set of ways of potentially answering those questions or interpreting things. And this person has this view and this person has this view, and there's this religion and this worldview. So it's just this profound sense of kind of paralysis, because you don't really know how to decide what to do, what's good, what's right, what's of value. And so I experienced that in that context as a profound meaning crisis. And that's one way that can happen for people, where they can kind of deconstruct from their meaning-giving frame. But it doesn't have to be just religion. It could be any number of ways that people have experienced that, of working with a particular model of reality and then just having that kind of kicked out from under them. And I think that experience is what we kind of collectively, in some ways, are going through. It's a challenge for us to be able to make sense of our experience, to have a frame in which we can orient ourselves and say, relative to this is good, this is bad, this is what I want, this is what I don't want, this would be the direction I want to move in, and this is the direction I want to move away from. Instead, there's just this sense of a kind of infinite possibility with nothing either good or bad, and the kind of radical confusion that comes from that. So, yeah, that was my experience of it. But then when you stand back from our kind of broader cultural moment, you can actually see that what many, many, many people are going through, and this kind of confusion and this kind of existential or meaning-making sense of disconnection, alienation, absurdity, disorientation, is a kind of social or collective version of this same kind of experience. And that's when you can start to contextualize or situate our kind of historical moment and what we're kind of all going through together, and see that kind of something similar has happened to us in terms of the stories that we tell and the erasure of the confidence that we have in those stories, and then the kind of collective vertigo and the collective disorientation. So that's when you talk about a meaning crisis collectively. I feel like you can relate that to your own experience of a loss of a meaning frame, and then see, when you look around in our society right now, that this seems to be the grip that we're in, kind of at a collective level. Bunch of different aspects that are kind of immediately salient, but like one of them, just think about trust. I mean, who can we trust? What do we take on authority? Whose authority? And there are two big aspects of this, that there's kind of a sense-making challenge before us, which is more of that, what is real? What is even actually going on, with the complexity and all the different interacting forces in our kind of media landscape, and what's a deep fake, and what's actually happened, and Is this AI video that I'm watching, is it an AI video? Or there's all that kind of stuff. That's more in the sense making, just what is the case. But I think more deeply, there's a meaning challenge at play there, which is, again, given whatever we think reality is, what is meaningful? What is valuable? What should I do? It's sort of like, how should I orient myself? And another example just might be, the sheer amount of possibility before us, right? It's like we're kind of often told, whether it's true or not, you can do anything, right? And in some ways, it's really liberating. But on the other hand, it's just sort of like, what do you do when you can do anything? What actually would be of value? And what actually could you meaningfully contribute to? Because in order to kind of get a grip on that, you have to have a story that kind of situates you and says, this is kind of what's significant. And if you can move in this direction, then that's a way of sort of assessing, like, yeah, that's the right next move. That's the thing I want to be helping to bring into being or participate in. And historically, there were all sorts of stories that helped orient people in that way. But now there's a million stories. And in some ways, by having a million stories, there's also then just no story. And I think having no story is really what most people tend to experience. It's just meaning that the story there is just something like, we're all kind of here by accident. There isn't really a particular meaning or significance to anything necessarily. We just kind of have to make the best of this kind of rather strange, absurd fluke chance event here of us being bags of, meat on a planet whirling through space in a cosmic void, and, good luck. That is actually a story, but it's a kind of story of storylessness. There's a kind of like, there isn't a plot to this story. It's just a bunch of like set decorations and characters bumping into each other and not really knowing what to do. So I think we experience that in all sorts of ways, of then being forced to navigate what seems like a very absurd kind of context without any kind of moorings or benchmarks or milestones or general kind of frame of reference setting devices that can say, this is the right direction and this is the wrong direction. Another way that this is really, I think, immediately sort of apprehensible for people is like what kind of falls under the banner of relativism, right? It's sort of like this notion that, yeah, no one has this story, but that's actually the way it's supposed to be. So if you even say that something is good and this other thing is bad, then like you're persona non grata. Like you're not supposed to do that. You're not in a position to be able to judge between stories, judge between narratives. Narratives are totally, you can't compare them. And I think a lot of us have that sense of when we want to go and speak from our kind of sense of truth of like, this is what I think matters and this is what I think is true. You have to be very careful these days about trying to make claims like that. Because people will shut you down and say, well, who are you to say? And what gives you the right to be able to say that this other thing is wrong? And there's all sorts of kind of policing and censorship that we kind of do amongst ourselves because often out of, good motivations to try to be thoughtful, kind of open people without foreclosing on other people's possibilities. But the consequence of a lot of that relativism is just that a lot of people don't think that then there is a good or a bad or a worse or a better. And so because of that, if you don't have a worse or a better, what direction are you going to go in? How do you actually make a decision faced with this infinite amount of possibilities before you? I think this is like a huge struggle for people. Just because the background sort of expectation or default is that there isn't a story and there necessarily, and then we can't be prescriptive and we can't say this is better, this is worse. That doesn't mean that we don't live as if there are actually real constraints on what we can and should do. The problem is they're kind of forced on us anyway as sort of just necessary given the system that we inhabit, and that in the void, in the vacuum of there being some kind of like bigger narrative that can tell us more deeply what life is about, what fills that is just market forces, this sort of like, as you said, got to go to school, got to get a good job so you can pay your bills, and then I guess have kids and then die. Like you're basically just labor for a machine, and that is still very much the expectation. That is the norm. That is the background default. It's just shorn of any actual significance to it. It's like, to what end? Why? It's like, well, those questions either can't be answered or shouldn't be answered, but damn it, go to work and make money for the man. It's kind of, that's non-negotiable. And so people have this experience of the drudgery of like this 9-to-5 existence or the gig economy, and having to basically fit themselves into this incredible kind of this pressure of an economic system that's just trying to extract from them all of this basically labor for the sake of, again, putting money in the pockets of shareholders and corporations, and not giving any sense of why is anything actually valuable, or why does anything actually mean anything. And I'm not sort of conspiratorial. I don't think that this is necessarily some great plan that, these mustache twirling monopoly men have, but it's very convenient when you don't have a narrative that can actually consolidate, coalesce people around some grand cause, and actually have values and meanings in their lives that have deeper principles beyond the profit motive, right? If you live in a society utterly devoid of meaning and value besides just market forces, then what kind of world do you get? Well, you get the kind of world we're currently living in, where it's like value is determined by how much can you get by cutting down the tree, rather than by experiencing the joy and the beauty and the wonder of the tree itself. We wind up making everything reducible to the dollar as some kind of ultimate arbiter of value, because every other form of value has sort of been undermined.